So today we're going to talk about bad advice. Bad advice is something that drives me absolutely crazy, and there's a lot of very successful people in arenas that I play in fitness and business, offering a lot of extremely bad advice. And people see the success that these individuals have and think that the advice that they're offering is, by nature of that success, good advice, and it's often not. And what's happening here a lot of the time is something called survivorship bias, which if you've done any playing around on the internet in terms of looking at different cognitive biases or read any sort of, think pieces on the ways that humans make errors in judgment, you've probably come across some form of survivorship bias, but I will do a brief explanation of it. But essentially, the idea is that by concentrating on things that are successful, you sort of disregard all the things that didn't make it. And this is extremely common in business and in fitness, that if you look at, multi-million-dollar corporations, or if you look at athletes that are successful, you'll often get explanations as to why they were successful provided by those athletes or those businesses or the CEOs or the leaders themselves that are essentially just like a post hoc rationalization for why they were able to achieve what they achieved. And if you take a look at the entire set of athletes who were in fact, competing to qualify for, say, the CrossFit Games, or the entire set of businesses that were competing to control some sort of market share, that you see something different when you consider all the people that didn't actually make it, right? That an athlete can say something like, as soon as I doubled down and I really started to want it, and I sacrificed everything else in my life to make it happen, that's when I turned the corner. And if you hear that, you might think that, that's the key to success. But then if you look at the entire set of athletes who actually attempted to, qualify for the CrossFit Games, who put their lives on hold and stopped moving forward with their careers and devoted everything to counting macros and training in the gym, who didn't actually qualify, then it becomes clear that, wait, that's actually not the thing that makes people successful. There's something else going on. So just to give some big picture idea of what actually happens with survivorship bias and what this term means, I'll give a few examples that are somewhat common in the pop psychology literature to actually explain this phenomenon. But I think one of the most salient examples is the phrase, they don't make them like they used to, right? So generally when people are sort of looking at some sort of like older thing, an older car, an older piece of furniture, an older tool or something that seems to be much more sturdy and robust than a lot of the things that are made contemporarily, it can result in some sort of feeling that, like, back in the day, they used to have much more stringent manufacturing processes. Everything was better. We were in touch with our traditions, all that kind of stuff. And some of those things may actually be true, but the fundamental thing that's happening is that by the very nature of the fact that the tool or the object still exists, it was in fact manufactured such that it would still exist, right? That all the other cheap, shoddily made, low budget things that weren't up to snuff are not still in use. So we're ignoring the entire set of tools that were made. And it's not necessarily that things used to be made more robustly. It's that the things that still exist today exist because they were in fact made more robustly, and not that everything was made that way. So that's a pretty salient example, I think, of the concept of survivorship bias. We also see it in some disingenuous and predatory marketing practices from investment funds. So, if you have X number of funds that people can invest money in, and all the ones that don't actually continuously show a profit over years are sort of folded or rolled into other funds, then you can sort of look at the entire suite of funds and say, oh, wow, like all these funds have shown this much profit over this time frame. And then based upon that, it looks like it's a no-brainer to invest, without realizing that a significant number of the funds that were potentially investment options several years ago no longer exist. And so that's a scenario of survivorship bias, in that only the things that are selected for in terms of, potentially being lucky in terms of the investments that they made, all that sort of stuff, are the ones that still exist. So that can be misleading to consumers because they think that they're making a surefire bet based upon the numbers that they see, but they're not seeing the entire suite of funds that didn't actually have a solid return on investment. We see similar things in terms of research, where when we're playing with noisy, complicated data, especially in complex emergent phenomena like social psychology, where there's tons and tons and tons of variables and people can't really properly control for all of them, no matter how well they randomize or how well they implement statistics on their data, there's going to be some relatively large percentage of scientific studies that are in fact just random noise in the data. But by virtue of the fact that we do run these statistics on it, and then we see, oh, you know what, this study was in fact statistically significant, meaning that it has an appropriate p-value to be published, that we end up publishing a lot of data based upon the fact that only the things that sort of randomly were in fact statistically significant are the ones that are going to get published. So there's tremendous survivorship bias in the publication of scientific literature, particularly in noisy, complex fields. So that's led to at least in part, to the current replication crisis in terms of large numbers of studies, particularly again in areas like social psychology, where there's just a lot going on, just failing to replicate, right? That people are unable to reproduce these effects. And it turns out that probably much more of the literature than we would have thought maybe 10 years ago is simply statistical noise or potential bias and all that kind of stuff. So, one of my favorite illustrations of survivorship bias, particularly in relationship to some of the things that I'm going to talk about today, is from a webcomic from XKCD, and it has I have it open right here, so I'll just read the actual text of the comic strip. It has a speaker on a stage with bags of money, indicating the type of riches and social status that people across the world aspire to. And the content of his speech is, never stop buying lottery tickets, no matter what anyone tells you. I failed again and again, but I never gave up. I took extra jobs and poured the money into tickets. And here I am, proof that if you put in the time, it pays off. Right? And the caption there is, every inspirational speech by someone successful should have to start with a disclaimer about survivorship bias. So kind of like I was saying earlier, that we have all these people who have achieved some level of success, and that's not necessarily to take anything away from them, because they often have done a lot of things right. But we don't necessarily see the corpses and the bodies of those who attempted to travel the path that those individuals traveled and just didn't make it for any number of reasons, whether it's luck or poor timing or some other factors out of their control, or simply just not doing as good of a job. But often the post hoc rationalization of why someone claims that they were in fact successful is not the real reason, right? So if we sort of take this mindset that we need to think about, okay, who also tried to do this and failed, and what is the difference between them and the people who were quote unquote successful, we can start to see that there's much more going on than just the standard advice that people give. And a lot of the advice that people give is quite frankly terrible, and is not in fact the thing that truly separates them in terms of achieving either the business or the athletic success that they claim. And as someone who, runs a business that is at least ostensibly somewhat successful in terms of ability to, offer CrossFit in a competitive downtown urban environment, and exist year after year, month over month, and actually pay some people enough of a wage that they can make most of their living from coaching, right? That I can tell you throughout our history that there were probably 5 to 15 times where we very nearly almost closed. And that if we hadn't gotten some sort of lucky break, that we would have not been in business, right? And that there were things like getting kicked out of our space, just losing tons and tons of members based upon issues with the location that we moved into, having flaky investors pull out of deals that they had committed to when we were sort of running extremely low on cash flow in terms of trying to get ourselves going again. That all of these things put us on the brink of collapse multiple times, right? And that a more, let's say, magically thinking inclined individual might say something like, oh, you know what, everything happens for a reason. Someone was looking out for us, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, the reality is that we did a good job in terms of trying to look for opportunities and be prepared to take them when they showed up. But honestly, if any number of those things had gone a different direction, we would have closed. And there's a lot of gyms in the Chicago area that I know that have shut their doors over the last year or two. And I think that a lot of those gyms, just got to a point where they didn't have enough sort of robustness in the system to deal with cash flow issues or landlords raising rent or significant membership swings. And then if one of those things happens, it can just knock you out. And so, giving some sort of explanation of like, oh, well, we did this, and that's why we were successful, just ignores the fact that there were a lot of things that really, really could have shut us down and put us out of business, and we would have still done everything quote unquote right. But even not that we did everything right, we did basically everything wrong, but some key things right. But that the fact that we were able to sort of make it through some of those more difficult times is honestly just a fact of luck, and then coupled with maybe a little bit of awareness of opportunity when some things came along that did enable us to sort of persevere through some of those challenging times. We see that as well with athletes, right? I've coached athletes who have had some decent levels of success in CrossFit at different levels, right? In terms of qualifying for regionals when they existed, qualifying for some of the sanctioned events, qualifying for some of the CrossFit games, and the reality is that you see these people who do well and who qualify and who have this level of success that people think is aspirational and that they want to achieve. But you also see on the back end when you're a coach, just as many people who are doing just as much stuff right, who are seemingly nearly as talented in the sport, who just don't actually qualify for stuff. And it's not always because of like a specific thing of like, oh, they just didn't want it enough, or they weren't willing to push hard enough in training or anything like that, right? That a lot of the times the things that dictate whether or not someone qualifies for something, especially someone who's potentially on the bubble, meaning that, if they have a few good breaks, they make it, and then that potentially changes their trajectory of their career as an athlete. And then the folks who just kind of always just miss, it's not always like, oh, they didn't have it together mentally, et cetera. Sometimes it's as simple as workout selection, right? Where especially in some of these qualifying events, if you have one bad workout that sort of hits a significant weakness or two for you in a specific way, that can just knock you out of contention based upon the amount of points that you accumulate. Something like poorly timed injuries, that most people who are training at a high level are going to get some sort of injury at some point, and that some people just get those injuries at very inopportune times, so they're unable to do training related to some of the movements that they're going to have to compete in, or they potentially have certain movements that they can't do during a qualifying process. And that you hear these inspirational stories of other people who are able to sort of push through injury or sort of like block out the pain. And yeah, some of those people maybe do have like a different level of mental resilience and ability to ignore pain than others. But there are plenty of situations where those individuals are also injured and are unable to actually do the things that they know they can do in terms of performance. And we also have just things like overall health situations, right? So sometimes people have autoimmune conditions that can flare up or not be flared up at specific times. They have potentially like longer term stress adaptation, where sometimes folks kind of hit like a weird sort of pseudo overtraining type of state where they're just unable to push through any sort of discomfort in training or in competing, that they start to get like sort of global system shutdown from fatigue-based work, and that these types of things can happen. And it's not just that, oh, you know what, it was all in their head and they mentally didn't want it enough, or they were afraid of success or something like that. Like, yeah, sure, there's potentially some reality to some of those types of concepts, but oftentimes there is just an element of chance. So it's not enough to say that the folks who make it through can tell you the story of like, yeah, I really focused and I trained hard, and year after year I got better, and I just knew that I was going to be able to qualify, and I just wanted it and did everything necessary. That there's plenty of other people who did the exact same thing, who were comparably skilled and comparably talented, and then didn't make it for any number of kind of random factors associated with that. So I think that a lot of these success stories feed into one of the great scourges of our brains, which is this concept of magical thinking. Which if you've been on the email list for a while, I've really laid into magical thinking. It drives me absolutely crazy. And I think it gives a lot of people a pretty disingenuous and unhelpful picture of how the world works. And what I mean by magical thinking, just to clarify, is the idea that by visualizing things and by wanting things and by focusing on them, that in and of itself is sufficient to create progress towards those things, right? And that's not to say that there isn't potentially value in having some sort of appropriate mindset, that there isn't potentially value in being aware of opportunity, that there isn't value in understanding that positive self-talk is better than negative self-talk, right? That there's all these things that are heavily supported in the psychological literature and just sort of like coaching day-to-day experience, but that's a different thing than this kind of like aggregation of all those things into this big picture magical thinking, which is, I think most, I would say, unfortunately realized in something like the Secret or the law of attraction, which is essentially that just by visualizing things that you're able to manifest them, right? Anytime someone's talking about quote unquote manifesting something, I'm highly triggered and upset by it. So I think that humans have a tendency toward magical thinking, which honestly may be an adaptive trait that may be positive for us as, a species trying to survive, to have some element of cause and effect dialed too high, and believing that our thoughts matter than they actually matter more than they actually do, and trying to visualize things that we want, and that may make us sensitive to opportunities that are positive for us in terms of our overall adaptation. That magical thinking may be a better way to approach the world than like totally disaffected nihilist skepticism, but that doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. And again, I just see too many issues with it in terms of people trying to achieve success in something like business or athletics, and they get caught in these magical thinking loops that are just really not helping them figure out what's going on. So if we sort of take a step back and think about, okay, if we can't really trust the people who are telling us how and why they did things as far as what resulted in their success, what does actually matter? And so I have a few things that I think matter more than a lot of the stories that people will tell. And that, there's the caveat that all of these things are potentially very complicated and have multiple different layers of cause and effect, and there might be certain things or certain tactics that are relevant in a specific situation. But that big picture, I think what's going on just from a business perspective, when someone has had significant business success, there's probably been one of two things that has potentially happened for them, right? One is that they've achieved an element of product market fit, which is startup terminology. And the idea here is that essentially you've found a problem that you can solve for a group of people that want that problem solved, right? So if you think about like a new tech startup that starts to gain that crazy exponential growth that you may see if you sort of play around in the tech podcasts or the tech blogosphere and all that kind of stuff, and you see these hockey stick growth numbers in terms of acquiring users, and these companies are trying to scale super rapidly and having a very difficult time even keeping up with the demands of the users, right? That I think the terminology that they've used is that they feel like the market is actually pulling the product out of them, that people are using it in a way that may not even be exactly what the founders anticipated, and they're just unable to keep up with the rapid growth of their actual product. And we've seen some of that as well in the CrossFit space with products that are sort of specific to that niche, right? That I've had some folks on the podcast who run companies that did achieve that product market fit, and then were sort of kicked into this rapidly scaling situation where it feels like everything's falling apart, right? Peter and our X Bar ran into that situation with a high protein, relatively clean protein bar that was not focused on like corny marketing like a lot of the bodybuilding products that were out at the time. And then based upon that, our X Bar was scaling so fast that they just couldn't even source enough dates to make their bars, right? Similarly, Orion Mellahan from LifeAid hit a similar tipping point with FitAid, right? That they were selling so much FitAid to CrossFit gyms and had found this offer related to giving them a free fridge, provided they ordered a certain amount of FitAid, and that they were just unable to keep up with the demand. So once you find that product market fit, which you can certainly do on purpose, you can attempt to find that on purpose, that the thing that's actually moving your growth forward is your product market fit. It's that you are solving a problem for people who know they want the problem solved and are willing to pay to have it solved. It's not any of the other random things that people will talk about as far as like morning routines or meditation, or maybe even the specific strategy that they're talking about might not even be the thing that is actually moving them forward, right? I mean, Orion talks about the FitAid fridge. And I certainly believe that that's a story that is compelling as far as, gym owners wanted a fridge to sell beverages. But is that the actual thing that resulted in the traction for FitAid? Maybe not. It could have been something else, right? But they clearly found some form of product market fit that was actually moving them forward. And then another aspect of business success that will sort of result in people having these outsized rewards and then potentially making up a fake reason for why it happened is becoming the winner in a winner take all or a winner take most market. And honestly, a lot of markets have these sort of winner take all or winner take most effects where that the leader in the market achieves some ridiculous dominant market share relative to number two. And then there's a bunch of other people who are fighting for scraps in that market. So I'm going to use my own experience in terms of urban environment CrossFit gym ownership, because at this point I would say that SLSC is a quote unquote winner in that market, that we achieve some level of dominance in terms of the number of new leads that are looking to start a start at a CrossFit gym in downtown Chicago. We're going to get a large percentage of those people who are going to at least reach out to us. And based upon that sort of facilitates having flywheel effects where we have more people reaching out, which means that we have more people converting, which means that we generate more revenue, which means we can reinvest in our staff more, which means that we can offer a more professional experience, which means that we can, get more referrals, which means that we can then purchase more equipment or invest in more amenities. Like that, all these flywheel effects result in the dominant player in a market being able to reinvest and sort of make a moat, quote unquote, around their business in terms of the ability to service clients and to offer stuff, right? So a lot of folks, especially in the CrossFit space, ended up being the quote unquote winner in their market based upon something that they didn't necessarily understand, right? That they were an early adopter, meaning that they sort of jumped into CrossFit gym ownership around the time that massive explosion of CrossFit gyms was occurring in the 2010 to 2014 timeframe, depending on where you were located. And then based upon that, they were able to achieve these kind of founder effects of having a relatively dominant market share and then becoming the known gym in the area. And then based upon that, being able to create these sort of flywheel effects of reinvesting into their business. So they'll tell stories about how, they just focused on doing a good job and that was sufficient, and that they just made sure the bathrooms were clean and that they looked all their clients in the eye and knew their name and shook their hands. And there's all kinds of gyms who are doing that, who are just not succeeding at all because they are not in the dominant position in their market, and that attempting to claw away market share from a dominant competitor who has flywheel effects going and who actually knows what they're doing from an operational perspective is not the same thing at all as sort of being in the right place at the right time to capitalize on product market fit and sort of like just hit this hockey stick growth curve and just do a good enough job to actually keep up with it. So that's something that drives me absolutely crazy sometimes when you hear people telling other gym owners what they should or shouldn't be doing, and you kind of look at their business and it's like, okay, well, you started in 2010 when you had literally no competitors, and if I do a Google Maps search, Google Maps search of nearby competitors, that there aren't any within like literally miles of your facility. And so you're telling all these other people who have 15 different gyms within a few miles of them and are starting from zero that all they need to do is like do a good job. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, you just have no perspective on what actually made you successful in the first place. And then from an athlete perspective, the big thing that matters is essentially how quickly do you adapt to training, and how quickly is that adaptation rate compared to your competitors, right? That some people get better more quickly than other people. It's not necessarily where they're starting at in terms of quote unquote talent. It's not that they can walk into the gym on day one and do X number of unbroken muscle ups and squat snatch a certain weight and then, row a 2K in a certain time frame. It's that they improve across the board in a bunch of different categories, right? We can use each of those things I just mentioned as an example, and they improve more quickly than the people with whom they're competing, right? So that they are able to, if you sort of think about their rate of adaptation over time, that they just get better faster, and that's the thing that makes them elite in the sport. And anyone who's done this for a while sees that adaptation is messy, and people kind of hit plateaus and then suddenly jump up in their skill level, and then they fall back down, and then they jump up again, and that it's not always clear how and why people are able to improve or maintain a level of improvement, or sort of put everything together for a perfect performance on a specific day and then not maintain it. But that's something that the mess of it doesn't take away the fact that there is a pretty clear difference in rate of adaptation between those who are going to be able to compete at a high level and those who are not. So when athletes are talking about, that they just focused and they wanted it and they went to that dark place, it's like, yeah, sure, maybe you did all that, but so did everyone else. And the reason that you are, in fact, standing on a podium or sitting in a qualifying position for something is because you got better more quickly than everybody who you were competing with. So I think those are the big picture things that matter. And then there's a few sort of specific pieces of advice that tend to drive me crazy that I've touched on a few of them already, but we'll kind of circle back to lay these out again, just because, every time I hear this, not only do I get frustrated because I think it's like an incorrect way of explaining things, but as someone who does coach athletes and who does, offer advice to other gym owners in terms of what I think they should be doing or what might matter to actually help them improve their business, that these little brain worms, these idea viruses, these sort of, magical thinking seeded concepts get in people's heads, and they think that they're doing something wrong by not focusing on these random things. Well, not really random, by not focusing on these things that other people who are successful are talking about, even though those are things that are just sort of like a case study in survivorship bias, right? So we think about athletes again, right? That one of the most common things that athletes will talk about is like mental toughness and getting their mind right and all that kind of stuff. And that, again, this is not to say that mental toughness doesn't matter and that you don't need to have discipline and resilience and ability to focus in the face of adversity and the ability to be aware of your own negative self-talk. That, like, yes, that all absolutely matters. But very rarely do I think that that's the thing that actually separates the people who are doing extremely well from those who are not. I do think that there is an element, especially at the elite level of sport, where marginal gains matter more, where something like, having the resilience to stick to your pacing strategy, learning the discipline to stick to your pacing strategy, learning to not sort of be like a front runner in that, if you are not doing well, you can't necessarily quit on the weekend. Like that, those strategies may make more of a difference for someone who is already competing at the absolute highest level, because those little marginal gains can make more of a difference there, since everyone is already very, very close in terms of their actual capabilities. But that said, I still just think that this stuff is overblown, and that the reason it's out there so much is that so many people resonate with this, and it creates a nice story for them, and it feeds into this kind of a toxic magical thinking narrative that seems to be so easy for human beings to latch onto. But yeah, people will talk about that once they got their mind right, that once they understood that they belonged, that once they understood that all they had to do was believe in themselves, that they were able to then achieve the next level of success. And it just drives me nuts, because a lot of these folks were already elite athletes, and that they essentially, particularly in some of the narratives I'm thinking of, right? Like people finishing, like Tia finishing second repeatedly at the CrossFit Games before finally winning, or some folks who I know who, just missed qualifying for regionals a few times and then were able to put it all together. And it's like, yeah, once I finally believed in myself, I was able to do it. And I just don't think that that's what actually happened. I think that a lot of those people were already relatively elite athletes and were already competing at an extremely high level. And when you first get to that level, you maybe don't have the entire skill set necessary to truly compete, right? That you are missing certain aspects in terms of either actual fitness or pacing strategy, or understanding what you can and can't do in a workout. And that through the process of coming close and competing with people who are, of a similar capability, and you're not just like stomping people in the gym or at local throwdowns anymore, that you start to acquire more and more skills based upon competing at a higher level, right? That you start to understand, oh, this is how I need to pace this type of workout. This is the type of pace that others are going to go relative to me. That, these are the exact things that I need to work on, that I started to fall apart based upon, my training, et cetera. And that through these experiences, you're actually improving. And then you're also able to focus your training on the things that you need to improve. And then through that improvement process, it's not like you're just like, oh, now I believe in myself. You actually have earned, we'll call it earned confidence, right? You've earned that confidence to to feel better about yourself because you've seen through your own performances that you are in fact improving relative to the field that you are competing against. So it's not just that you believe in yourself. I think believing in yourself in a lot of cases is sort of like a post hoc thing that happens once you've achieved a certain level of success. And then based upon that, it feels like all of a sudden you believe in yourself and you're winning, but you sort of are winning, so you believe in yourself. So, I mean, who knows what's actually going on with this, but that's one of the things that always kind of rubs me the wrong way, where people think that simply by believing they're going to achieve that next level. But the reality is that a lot of those people were already really, really good and just needed to gain the reference experiences of competing at that level and shore up a few sort of weak spots to take it to the next step of either winning or qualifying for the next stage. And that based upon that, they now have confidence because of their experience of doing better. So it's not enough to just believe in yourself. Believing in yourself often comes after you've achieved the thing that you want to achieve or have demonstrated to yourself that you're progressing towards that thing at a rate that actually makes sense. Similarly, a lot of people will talk about how once they went all in on something that they were then able to achieve it, right? It's like, yeah, I was sort of like dabbling with this business on the side. And then once I went all in, our revenue tripled or whatever. Or similarly with an athlete, it's like, yeah, I was training a little bit and trying some of this stuff and whatever. And then once I actually committed to my training and I hired a coach and I really went all in, that's when I went to the next level. And I think that, again, this is something that's sort of like a necessary step of continued growth, that a lot of these people were already on a very fast trajectory to improvement. They were already on a trajectory to become a better athlete. They were already on a trajectory where their business was growing rapidly. And that the next step of that improvement is to, in fact, spend more time working on the thing, to spend more money working on the thing, to spend more mental resources working on the thing. So that a lot of these people have already started this process of this thing happening. And then it's not like they suddenly just went all in and then all this stuff happened. It was already happening. And this was just a crucial step along the way, right? You can sort of think about, there's all kinds of, funny political graphs showing economic growth, since presidents often live and die by the economy, right? In terms of public opinion, that people will praise a president as the economy improves and sort of turn on a president as the economy declines. But a lot of the time you can sort of see when people take office, and if you look at these big picture trends, that the economy has been going up for a very long time before, whoever took office, and it's just going to continue to go up because it was a broader trend, and that person taking office was really not the thing that actually changed it. And similarly, you can see economic decline often follows a similar pattern where it's like, yeah, the economy was already going to decline and it was in the process of declining, and then this person took office or changed this policy. And it's not to say that there's not potentially things that need to happen along the way, like spending more time on training or spending more time on your business to continue that trajectory, potentially upward in performance, but that you were probably already on that path, and that it's not like someone who is not on that path suddenly quitting their job and dedicating their lives to training is going to suddenly make it, right? It's like you should have some clear indication that this is a good decision for you based upon your current growth, and that you're already limited by not taking that step. Or, with a business that you should have some clear opportunity cost to quote unquote quitting your job to focus on that business, right? If you don't have enough clients that you're starting to get stressed out and you're missing out on the opportunity to take on more clients, or there's obvious things that you could be doing to grow your business because you are in fact, spending too much time at a 9 to 5 or commuting or responding to email. It's like, you have to have an opportunity cost to your time before you decide that you're just gonna quit and go all in. So that's one of the other big things that really tends to rub me the wrong way, because people are already on this trajectory, and it's not the fact that they decided to do that thing that actually pushed them to the next step. It's they were already on their way to the next step, and it's sort of like a necessary aspect of taking that step. And then especially with athletes as well, a lot of folks will follow just like absolutely crazy training programs, right? It's just so much stuff. It's so much volume. It's so much intensity. It's, so many different movement patterns in one day. It's just kind of a hodgepodge of everything. And that's not necessarily a bad way for someone who is at an elite level and is hyper resilient to train, right? Because it sort of mimics the demands of their sport, particularly in CrossFit. But when we have people who are not at that level trying to follow those training programs, that's when things get messy. And so if you think again about the concept of survivorship bias, almost by definition of being able to execute a lot of the online competitor programs that are out there, an individual is elite, right? Just the fact that they can even do the program day in, day out as prescribed, complete the work. It's like, okay, who can actually do that? Someone who is potentially a CrossFit Games athlete. And so this concept of wanting to do what the elite are doing, like, makes sense to people, right? It's like, oh, maybe they know something I don't know. There might be some good training principles in there. And that's potentially true. There are things that elite athletes are doing that other people don't really understand. And that by sort of examining their training and seeing what they are doing, you can learn a lot. You can be like, oh, that's actually a pretty good idea. Or like, oh, that's interesting that they pace it that way. But simply trying to do the same training that they're doing, you don't see, again, the sort of bodies littered along the road of people trying to accomplish those same tasks. And they're just not there. They don't have the capacity to handle that amount of volume. They haven't built up the training volume to handle that. They don't understand how to pace themselves relative to that amount of work throughout a day or throughout a week. They don't have the freakish capacity to recover very quickly in between sessions. They don't have the certain metabolic machinery that enables elite athletes to recover more quickly within a session, and then also to do more work without producing as much metabolic waste, or filtering that waste more efficiently and effectively. And that all of these things result in people trying to do stuff that they're just not physiologically cut out to do, in an attempt to sort of like mimic the training programs of the elite, without understanding that there's, hundreds of other people who are trying to do this same exact program, and they're not elite. They're not the ones who are successful. So it's just not the thing that separates people, right? That, yeah, the program makes sense, and it might be a good thing for elite athletes to do. But if you're not at that level, that just simply checking the boxes of I'm going to execute this as well, like, that's not the thing that got them there. And then the final thing that really starts to bother me, which I mentioned a few times, is when people are talking about business success, and this happens in CrossFit, this happens in software, this happens in just about anything, that they'll say things like, yeah, you just got to focus on creating a quality product, and the rest will take care of itself. And that's something that if you have product market fit, or you are already sort of like a winner in a winner take all or a winner take most market, that's potentially actually good advice, right? That you found an audience who wants what you're selling, and that they probably have some element of viral recommendations or marketing based upon that, right? That they're telling people who they know about your product because it's solving this problem, and they know other people who have this problem. And then based upon that, just by focusing on the quality of the product and making it better and better able to solve their problem, you are able to potentially increase that virality of recommendation, because the market wants exactly what you're selling. And so that's not to say that you don't need to have a good product, right? You obviously need to have a good product, but that if you are someone who is not in an area where there's like a new product market fit to be found, or you are potentially competing with someone who is an entrenched competitor who already has a significant amount of market share and has already got some flywheel effects going, that simply trying to improve the quality of your product is not necessarily going to be the thing that actually pulls people away, right? That's not necessarily going to be the thing that generates new clients for you, or puts you in a different position than your competitor. So people will talk about this and they'll say, yeah, we just did a really good job. Like our top priority was our coaches. Our top priority was making sure the programming made sense. And that the reality is that especially in the CrossFit gym market, a lot of people can't really differentiate the quality between coaches and programming. They just really don't know that there's probably a threshold of being extremely exceptionally good that people will notice, and there's a threshold of being extremely bad that people will notice. And the reality is that most people are not anywhere near either of those, right? That the amount of work and effort and knowledge that they would have to gain to become truly elite to the point that people would notice it is probably not actually a good use of their time, and is potentially even unrealistic for them based upon just their capacity and their willingness to sort of buckle down and figure it out. And that, the threshold below which people are noticing that you're actively terrible is pretty low. So just trying to differentiate yourself in terms of focusing on product alone is really not going to be the thing that actually improves your business, right? That the people who are saying that are people who probably got onto the fitness business ownership train
in the right place at the right time and were able to capitalize on a significant new market of early adopters. And by focusing on those individuals and doing a great job, they generated significant amounts of referrals and became the leader in their market. And then based upon that, had more and more individuals who are then coming to them based upon their reputation. So it's just really not necessarily the thing that people need to be focusing on. And the way that people talk about it, I think, is disingenuous because they don't recognize the sort of market forces in a bigger picture environment that we're at play in their own success. So it gives them this sort of false idea that all you have to do is just do a good job, and then people will they'll come to you and you'll just make money. It's easy. Why don't you just do a good job? So quick summary of all that stuff. When people talk about their success in business or their success in athletics, there's a great chance that they are talking about it in a way that doesn't account for all the people who try to do the exact same things as them with very similar levels of effort, very similar levels of focus on quality, very similar levels of discipline, and just did not actually succeed. And that there's other things going on, either in terms of market forces or just rate of adaptation to training, that probably are the main features that account for their success. And if they don't talk about it in a way that acknowledges those things, it doesn't mean you can't learn anything, because a lot of those people do know things that are valuable, but it should give you some pause in terms of just applying these ideas. Oh, I just have to want it more. I just need to focus, or I need to have like a stupid morning routine where I journal and meditate. And that's going to be the thing that actually makes you successful.
Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead, open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.